This is the J. Scott Outdoors podcast on Western big game hunting and fishing, brought to you by GoHunt.com Insider. Research faster, hunt more. Go to GoHunt.com/insider and join today. I'm your host, Jay Scott, and I live and breathe hunting and fishing, spending half the year in the field experiencing God's creation. I hope you'll enjoy hearing about our adventures. Guys, as you know, GoHunt.com Insider is the title sponsor of this podcast, and I want to thank them for their sponsorship. I wanted to give you a chance to listen to the head of the Insider program, Dave Loescher, as he talks about the unit profiles section of the GoHunt Insider. Before we get to that, I want to remind you to use the J. Scott promo code when signing up for GoHunt Insider. All you have to do is go to www.gohunt.com/insider, find the blue Join Now button, and use J. Scott as the promo code, and you'll receive a $50 KUIU gift card. After you sign up, they will send you an electronic gift card that you can use at KUIU. Now let's hear from Dave Loescher.
Let's take a few minutes now and I'll show you the unit profile, and you'll be able to see all the information that we've gathered and put within this profile to help you to plan for your next hunt. Go into Nevada and we'll pull up a unit right now. Right here, as you get into the unit profile, you're going to be able to see the species icons at the top, and those are going to show you exactly which species are offered in that unit. As you go down, the snapshot's going to be a quick overview of the unit, the buzz, the latest talk from the different hunters about the unit, as well as what seasons are hot, maybe what seasons aren't so hot. On the ground, this section is going to talk about the terrain, the vegetation, access, recommendations on lodging and camping, our historical temperature and precipitation. This is extremely valuable because we're not simply going with information from the local town, the nearest town that may be 60, 80, or 100 miles away. Our data team has figured out a way to drop pin locations right within the unit where it's most important, where it's most relative to a hunter, and we can talk about the temperature and the precipitation and display it on a multi-year basis so you have an understanding of exactly what it is you're going to encounter. Right here, the species that are within this unit, you're going to see these icons again that show each individual species that's offered for big game hunting, and you can see right here we're on mule deer, and as you go down, then it's going to go into a season by season description. As you can see, the dates are right there. And under these dates, you can see where the deer are most likely to reside as far as elevation. The data that corresponds with each individual season is going to show the resident and the non-resident quotas, the harvest success, and you can compare the correlation between an increase or a decrease in quota versus how that may have impacted the harvest success on any given year. Each individual season offered for mule deer will be covered. As I go up, if I want to take a look at elk, I can just click right here on the elk icon, and here I can get the same thing, information on the elk herd in the unit. You're going to notice on the right side of our unit profile, there's a ton of valuable information. First thing I want to point out, we'll get into the mapping in a moment, but I want to point out the quick tips. In this particular unit, limited cell phone service, often none. This is great, this is valuable stuff to know. Should I get a satellite phone? Is my cell phone going to work? This moon phase calendar is extremely important. Do you have a full moon? Do you have a no moon? Because that can impact your hunt. Now up on the mapping section, we've got that broken down on the map on a unit-by-unit basis, so you can actually expand the view by clicking right here, and you'll pull right into it. And here's our unit that we're talking about. And you can actually take it off of the map view, and you can go straight into the satellite view. Because if you want to get an actual picture representation of a given area, I'm going to drop this orange man right here in unit 061. You can get the actual picture of the unit, of the terrain, and you can see exactly what it is. Now, within this map, here's another cool thing that we've put together for you as a user. Right here, these area services on the bottom. Within the area services, if you're looking for lodging, grocery, gas station, or the local airport, you can turn these on and turn these off as you need them. We spent a lot of time finding the local hunters to write these profiles for us that actually have boots on the ground experience in these given units so that you could better plan for your upcoming hunt.
Well, that was great to hear from Dave Loescher of GoHunt.com Insider, and I want to thank GoHunt.com Insider for being the title sponsor of this podcast. I also would like to thank Deadeye Outfitters, who makes quality t-shirts, sweatshirts, and hats designed with hunters in mind. Deadeye Outfitters has the only license for creating Boone and Crockett apparel, And I want to tell you guys that if you use the J Scott promo code, you will receive a 10% discount on all purchases at deadeyeoutfitters.com. I want to thank them additionally for their sponsorship of the J Scott Outdoors podcast. Today we have an episode with Craig Steele and Lee Murphy of Exclusive Pursuits Outfitters on how to score and field judge antelope and how to hunt antelope. And I think you guys are going to really enjoy this episode. I wanted to bring your attention to a couple of things, and for one, say thank you to the listeners for all of their support with this podcast. If you haven't noticed, on iTunes, there are some very good reviews. I'm going to read a few of them about the J Scott Outdoors podcast. I'm truly humbled by each one of these reviews. I'm going to start out by saying the first review is hooked. I'm hooked on this podcast. I enjoy the quality of guests on the show and the range of topics. I also appreciate the frequency and the new episodes that are uploaded. I'm always ready for the next one. That's KH Bowfly. Top notch. Devil Dog 1980 says J Scott is setting the standard for hunting podcasts. The information he provides is invaluable to anyone that enjoys hunting and fishing. His guests are some of the most informed people in the business. Keep up the good work, Jay. Great hunting podcast by Trail OA. A great podcast for the Western hunter. Good job. J Scott podcast rocks. I have listened to all of Jay Scott's podcasts. I think I've figured out why they're so good. Jay asks his guests great questions. They may seem like no big deal, but it is. Also, letting them finish their answer is key too. Good job, Jay. Very informative, great knowledge. Wilkie Nathan. Being a guide in New Mexico, these podcasts are very accurate, and the knowledge being dropped on these podcasts is priceless. Jay and his guest hit Western hunting right on the head. There's just an example of some of the comments on iTunes. And guys, I appreciate if you listen and you haven't given a review on iTunes. I appreciate it. I want to thank you guys, the listeners. I want to thank you for following along on my Instagram page at J Scott Outdoors, and my associate Dar Colburn at Dar Colburn. Also our Facebook page, J Scott Outdoors, YouTube channel, J Scott Outdoors, and of course the home website, which is jscottoutdoors.com. Guys, without you and without the sponsors, this podcast wouldn't be possible. I also want to thank all of the guests that I've had. Just a extreme wealth of knowledge. Everybody's come on and been real energetic, and just want to say hats off to them and thank you for all of the great support. And we're going to do our best here to keep the gas mash down and bring you some great episodes all throughout the year. And I hope you find each and every one of them unique. And if you need to get a hold of me, if you want to leave comments or questions, you can reach me at jscottoutdoors@gmail.com. I get emails daily from the listeners, and I really enjoy them. I just want to thank you guys, and let's get right to the episode with Exclusive Pursuit Outfitters, Craig Steele and Lee Murphy. Welcome to the J Scott Outdoors podcast. Today we have a real special episode for you guys. We have Lee Murphy and Craig Steele of Exclusive Pursuit Outfitters. Craig and Lee are two of Arizona's finest big game hunting guides, and they really like antelope, and they have a very good track record putting big antelope bucks on the ground. Really excited to get their input on Arizona antelope hunting. And guys, how you doing?
Good. How are you doing, Jay?
Good. Lee, why don't you start out? Give me just a small brief background on yourself as far as hunting and guiding and where you reside, and then I'll ask Craig the same thing.
Okay. Well, I was born and raised in north central Arizona. I grew up on a ranch and grew up hunting and fishing, trapping in the winter with my dad. It was just a way of life. So that's kind of my background, how I got started in hunting. It's just always been second nature. And the antelope hunting is something that I kind of have a niche for, because I grew up around a lot of really good antelope habitat in the Prescott area.
So being around big bucks and antelope in general has given you a keen eye as far as being able to field judge them and know what's a good buck and what's not?
Yeah, I get the opportunity to see a lot of antelope, and, been around them a lot. So that's a real important factor in antelope, because they're really hard to field judge, and it takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of patience to learn about them. So.
Well, I'm excited to hear what you have to say today about them. Craig, give me a little background on you. I've had you on the podcast before, but tell me, why you like antelope and why they get under your skin, and a little background on that.
Antelope, it's actually not necessarily my favorite species, but big antelope, there's something crazy about big antelope. When you see big antelope, you can't take your eyes off of them. So I love big antelope. I started my first tag I drew, I think it was 2000, and that was an archery tag. And draw odds back then for archery were I think it was 35% draw to draw that tag. I didn't kill a buck. I hunted one buck exclusively the whole time and got my butt kicked, missed him twice. The following year, I drew the same tag, and I tried one stalk. That buck was still alive. I tried one stalk on him. He was almost in an unstalkable area, and I got frustrated, and I went up and headed up to the trees and got lucky, and an old 70-inch buck walked by me, and I plugged him at 20 yards. And then I didn't draw the following year, and then the next year I drew again. But, this was 2003, and that was the first year I got to see a really big antelope, and it's still to this day the biggest antelope I've ever seen in my life. Another guy named him Tippers, and I hunted that buck for several days, and it's one of those deals where the monsoon came, and there was my uncle was hunting the same unit, but he was pretty novice bow hunter, and then and he was just sitting on water, and then his good friend was also hunting, and he'd killed an 82-inch buck off water. Well, it rained a whole bunch, and he decided if he couldn't sit water, he wasn't going to hunt. And I was like, I'm not gonna. I got the vacation time off work. I'm gonna try to lay the hammer down on one. And I hunted that big buck, and I missed him at a pretty far distance, and he was probably about 91, 92 that year. I didn't know he was that big because I really didn't pay that much attention to field judging other than he was just giant. I ended up killing a 82-inch. No, actually it was 80-inch. There I go, exaggerating. He was an 80-inch buck. I didn't think he was that big. I thought he was high 70s. I killed that.
Now this is with your bow?
This is with my bow. I killed him.
Okay.
My mom was filming that deal, and I killed him at 30 yards. There was actually another buck there that I thought was a little bit bigger, but with your bow, you're not going to be too picky. I killed that buck, and then 2 years later, my sister and brother-in-law drew the same tag, and we went out there with the intentions of killing whatever nice buck we could kill, and we seen the big buck. He was alive again, Tippers, and he was just giant again. And but he was in the wrong area, so we couldn't hunt him. There was some private property that we couldn't hunt, and he was in that area. And anyway, my sister ended up killing a buck, and then that Tippers buck got killed by a muzzleloader hunter. And I finally saw the pictures of him. He was, just unreal. And ever since I've seen that buck, that Tippers buck, when you see a buck that's just got huge mass like that buck, it's something that stands out in your mind. So that's kind of I drew again in 2010, and then Lee and I have started guiding. Lee's been doing it for longer than I have, specifically on the antelope. I actually When we're out in the field looking for antelope, I defer to him a lot. He knows I'm a Peter Panic when it comes to field judging, because it's just something you have to do, and you have to do it a lot. You have to have a lot of them in your hands, and you have to get a lot of second opinions, because they're really hard to field judge.
Yeah, I mean, having a small frame, so to speak, we're talking a horn rather than an antler, and a relatively small horn. I imagine body size and a lot of things play into that factor of what makes a big antelope and what makes a medium-sized antelope, and we'll get into that in a little bit. Guys, first I want to ask you kind of what your favorite units in Arizona are, and then after that we're going to kind of go into the difference between bow hunting and rifle hunting or muzzleloader hunting these antelope. And I think one of the things that's important to note in the state of Arizona, the draw for bow hunting archery antelope is actually quite a bit more liberal than our hard to draw rifle tag. So we'll probably touch on that. But what are some of your favorite units, Lee?
Well, some of the favorite units I have are 17B, 19B, 19A. Those are some of the best quality and have some of the best genetics, but they're super low draw odds. So if you get to hunt in there with somebody or get to hunt those units, it's really special because they have some of the best genetics anywhere there is. But I get the most opportunity to hunt with guys in units 10 or 18A, 18B, Unit 8, Unit 7, because there's a little bit better draw odds, and we help a lot of hunters and friends hunt in those areas.
If you had to say, Lee, where you typically get most of your hunters, which unit? Is there one unit that stands out, or 2 or 3 units that are like your primary guided units, or do you just bounce all over whatever comes your way?
Well, historically we've done a lot of hunts in Unit 10 and the 18 units. Once in a while we'll bounce around to some of the other units, but those are primarily the ones that we specialize in and have the most experience in.
Gotcha. And Craig, what are your favorite units for antelope?
Probably, 18A, 18B, 10, 15, not 9, 8, 7. I like any of those units. It's hard to get drawn, and then it's hard to get clients. And like Lee was saying, it just really depends. 10 because it has a lot more antelope, and is a lot bigger unit. So that's
and a lot more tags.
Yeah, a lot more tags. So you get a lot more opportunity to either A, draw it, or B, guide hunters there. I like any of those units if you have the time to scout them and put the effort in. Any of those units, I think, along with the ones that Lee mentioned, can produce really good antelope.
So from what I hear you guys saying is it depends on year to year into which hunts you actually get clients in. You know all the units. You each have some of your favorite units. Some of them maybe because of proximity to where you live. But you can basically field an antelope hunter in any of those units. And then once you have a hunter in those units, then you put your scouting efforts and focus on those units. And maybe some of your favorite units maybe go a year and you don't even go and really mess around in there.
Yeah. That's a pretty fair assessment, Jay. That's typically how it is, and it's just because there's a very limited amount of antelope tags. There's guys in Arizona that wait for 30 years and never draw an antelope tag.
Sure. Let's talk a little bit, guys, in bow hunting, with archery equipment as opposed to gun hunting. And, there's trophy expectations for, guys that bow hunt, and then maybe guys that rifle hunt have a different trophy expectation. Let's talk about that, but let's also talk about the pros and cons, so to speak, of bow hunting versus rifle hunting. And I don't care which one of you starts first, but maybe dive into the differences in bow hunting and the pros and cons of bow hunting and rifle hunting.
Go ahead, Lee.
No, you go ahead and start on that one, then I'll pick on you.
Okay, I'll go with bow hunting first. I'll tackle that. Bow hunting, your success rates go down tremendously compared to with a rifle or even with a muzzleloader. I mean, your success rates are you're gonna kill an antelope if you choose to with a gun versus with a bow. During the rut, and being just how antelope are and where they live, 90% of the population in wide open stuff, and they're obviously everybody knows about their eyesight, but they're such a unique animal, and you never know what they're going to do. A lot of guys want to hit that 80-inch mark with a bow. I'd say that's kind of a fair assessment of where most guys are. There are bucks that are killed that are in the mid-80s every year, but it's few and far between. If a guy can kill a 70-inch antelope, I mean, he's doing something, because I don't know exactly what the success rates are, and Lee might have this. He's really good at the data stuff, but I would venture to say it's probably in 20% range.
Is that strictly from a basis of they're hard to get close to, and obviously they're a fairly small target, and or with a rifle you're going to be able to get 300, 400 yards from most of these antelope and have a lot more shot opportunities? Is the success in antelope lower because of the fact that it's hard to get within side say 70 yards of them?
I'd say it is. Because most of the antelope are highly visible all the time. It's kind of like sheep hunting where you're going to be able to see them, and you're going to probably be able to get to within 300-400 yards if you take your time with a gun. Versus with a bow, I mean, you're talking a totally different story. And then as far as tactics wise, if you get a unit that's really, really dry, or a year that's really dry, that's when you'll see spikes in success rates. Because I know one year there was a unit over here that had 5-10 permits, and we didn't have a monsoon hardly at all, and I think they were 100% on their success rate for those permits, but they sat like 2 or 3 different water sources, and those it's during the hottest month of the year, August. And, those antelope just had to hit the water. But I always say you can't rely on that, because, Lee and I, every year when we're out in August and September, we're usually swimming or floating somewhere because of the monsoon.
Sure.
You get, maybe one out of every 4 or 5 years where the monsoon doesn't hit. And even if it's an overall dry monsoon, typically August is the most active month. So, I mean, it could be dry up until then, and all of a sudden it rains 3 or 4 inches, and then it just totally changes the dynamics of hunting them with a bow. So
what you're saying is if the monsoons come in, there's going to be water everywhere, and you can't be effective being an archer sitting water as well, because there's water all over, and they're not locked into the water holes and specific spots where archers can target them. Is that what I hear you saying?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say that's a fair statement, that they'll still hit water, but they got pockets of water everywhere, and they are habitual, but they're not that habitual, because they're rutting at that point in time, so they're running all over the place, especially the bigger bucks. The bigger bucks, the bucks with the does, those are the really hard ones to get killed, because they obviously have more eyes and ears. So
from a gun hunting perspective, Lee, as opposed to bow hunting, when is the rut generally, and how does it coincide with the archery hunt as opposed to the rifle hunt, and how does that make the rifle hunt maybe say better than the archery hunt?
Well, the rifle hunts has been historically here the last several years has been during the rut, but they split some of those hunts up this year, so some of them are actually in October post-rut this year.
And how do you think those hunts, a lot of the antelope hunts have been moved to October. Post-rut, how do you see those hunts, how do you see that going?
Well, I think it'll still be, the bucks will still be around the does. You usually see them around the does even post-rut. Some of the bigger bucks or more aggressive bucks may be a little more tired and may be off by themselves and might make them a little tougher to find. It'll be interesting to see how that goes this year in those units, what guys, find out and what they do on those hunts. But going back to the rut, in the archery hunts in August and late August, those bucks are really aggressive, and a lot of times it gives an archery hunter opportunity because the bucks they're really not paying attention to what's going on around them. They're paying attention to other antelope or other bucks.
So it creates a spot and stalk opportunity when they're not on their game as far as being as aware. They're more chasing off other bucks and running around like wild men. Yeah,
and there's certain units that just don't offer that spot and stalk availability where it's just grassland. There's no brush, no contour, and those units are really you're gonna be better off sitting in water. And you can still spot and stalk or try decoy. Guys do that and have pretty good success with that. I haven't tried the decoys that much myself, but we prefer to hunt units archery that have a little more contour, some trees, and some brush. It really enables you to use a spot and stalk method really effectively if you try, and just keep working at it, because antelope are a little bit different animal too than deer and elk. They really don't miss you with their vision. They pretty much know you're there, and it's almost like they have a confidence that as long as they can see you, they know that they can outrun you. So a lot of times you can get fairly close to antelope, within 100 yards, depending on the unit and how hard they get hunted, and it's just cracking that last 30 or 40 yards to be able to get within bow range sometimes.
I want to ask you guys about how you find big bucks and how you do your scouting. You guys obviously have local knowledge of all these units, but, every year things change and what have you. How do you go about scouting for antelope and then scouting for big bucks?
Well, for scouting big bucks, a lot of it is past seasons. You see a buck that is a young buck that has potential. I will go back and look for those same antelope the next year. There's certain areas that seem to genetically will produce bucks. But it's mostly you spend a lot of time out there looking. And antelope are not that hard to find. Everybody knows that. They're not really that difficult to find or spot. But to most people, they look the same. They don't look that much different. One buck looks like the other buck. So that's where it gets a little bit more complicated, and you just have to really spend a lot of time getting to know antelope and what certain characteristics can cause a buck to be a better trophy or score more, and start watching for that.
And so from a scouting perspective, when you break down a unit, you, Lee, are going off of your knowledge from bucks from prior years. You're specifically targeting bucks that you've seen before. But let's say maybe a unit that maybe you're not as familiar with. How do you break down that specific unit? Like, where would you even start for maybe the people out there that maybe are going unguided? What advice would you guys have for, getting drawn, and, where do they even start?
Well, you can ask people that have hunted before, try and connect with other hunters if you don't know a unit. If there's ranching in the area, you can talk with ranchers or people that take care of the waters on the ranches. Ask them where they've seen antelope. A lot of times word of mouth is how big animals, whether it's an antelope, elk, or a deer, get out. I saw a big buck over here by tank number 2. And so you go check those kind of leads out. a lot of times that's how big things are found, just by talking to as many people as you can. So you kind of have to gather your scouting information from just about any source that you can think of when you're learning a unit.
One thing I would do is just like what Lee said, gather as much information as you can before you head out there. And then, if you have, depending upon, everybody has a different amount of time, different amount of money to go do it. So depending upon all that, you need to kind of formulate a plan of, okay, well, I got 6 weekends, so, this is how big my unit is, and I know this about it. I know this is the areas based on the game and fish, talking to wildlife manager, what you find online, people you've talked to that have had it before, and okay, I'm going to go hit this area for 2 days. I'm going to check it out. I'm going to go.
And Craig, what are you looking for? Are you looking for antelope? Are you looking for good, water holes? What specifically? Are you strictly looking for numbers of animals?
Personally, what I like to do, again, it depends on your time. If you have all the time in the world, let's say you waited 30 years for this and you're going to go do it and your wife's not going to complain about you being gone, I would go drive all the roads first, drive every inch of it that I could drive. I would look for antelope country. Like Lee said, it really helps there because there is pockets of antelope in areas that you can't see them sometimes. And if you're looking for a big old buck, there may only be one 85-inch buck in that unit, or that that you're going to be able to find. So that 185-inch buck, although he's out in the open, he's moving around. Those little pockets of antelope are ones that you got to know about and try to find. So if you don't have that knowledge, you got to kind of go with the mindset of, if I want to kill the biggest antelope in that unit, I'm going to go drive every road. I'm going to look, for areas that obviously have water. You're going to look for tracks. You're going to look for antelope like to make scrapes or mark in the road, just like a coyote will. And
what time of year will they be doing that, Craig? So, you find out that you drew. We find out usually like the third week in July. That doesn't give you a lot of time. Will they be scraping by then?
Man, I seen 2 bucks the other day chasing each other. So They're always doing dominant things. Bucks are always, the older bucks, they'll slack off a little bit because, they usually got bigger body and can intimidate the other ones. And the other ones know this is, he's the big guy in town. So he'll save his energy a little bit. But as far as finding antelope sign, they'll do a lot of those scrapes and stuff all year. Fence lines, they like to do that, look for where they're going underneath fence lines. Find any glassing points. But the first couple days, I would just drive around and cover as much country as I can. I might not even get out of my truck,
So you're basically learning the unit, learning the roads, learning how to get around, looking for vantage points where you can see big amounts of country, marking down where you see antelope, and then a whole nother game is field judging, which we're going to touch on in a bit. Tell me about driving around in the unit, and when you see antelope, what do you do? Do you stop immediately? Do you keep moving? I mean, what do you guys do from a tactical standpoint when a buck's, a couple hundred yards off the road and he's standing there looking at you? Do you stop or do you keep going like you don't care? What's your strategy there?
That's all you, Lee.
Well, that's road hunting.
Let's say you're scouting.
That depends on the unit a lot, Jay. Some of the units that don't have very many tags, which is a lot of the antelope units, you can get away with driving around, sometimes even walking around, because they're used to seeing people, like especially the units in central Arizona around Prescott. But you get into a unit like Unit 10, there's areas of Unit 10, they see a dust cloud of a vehicle coming 3 miles away and they're gone. They can get really wild, especially up in the plains of Unit 10. So it kind of depends on where you're at, but your scenario there, if I were to pull up and see an antelope a couple hundred yards, I kind of take a temperature of what they're doing. If they're paying attention to me and they look like they're going to get nervous and run off, I will just drive by in hopes that I can move to a close vantage point and walk out and maybe sneak up on them a little bit and get a look. If they'll stand there, I'll look at them from the vehicle. It just kind of depends.
And guys, what kind of territory do these bucks run? I mean, I'm a Coues deer hunter and know that usually Coues deer have a very tight home range. Talk to me a little bit about the travel patterns of antelope, bucks, does, what have you, and then how maybe that changes during the rut.
Well, they don't move a lot. Antelope are fairly territorial, but sometimes bucks will move several miles to rut does in different areas, but they're typically fairly territorial. They'll use different pieces of country at different times of the year, basically chasing feed wherever the feed is the best or the greenest. You got anything to add there, Craig?
Yeah, they'll do that a lot. The monsoon rain, they're eating on grass primarily what they eat. And so that monsoon, depending upon if it's spotty or not, that's your antelope. There's areas sometimes where we hunted with Cody Conklin and Jim a couple years ago on the archery hunts. I think it was last year or the year before. Well, we hunted with them in 2013, but last year I don't think there was hardly any antelope in that area. And so that was just all based on the feed and whatnot. So that changes them a little bit, but they are very territorial, like Lee was saying, and sometimes when it's dry everywhere, they're going to be right where they're going to be. And those bigger bucks, they'll rut the same places year after year and live in the same places, and they'll come back based on if they have the food and water. It's just kind of like Coues deer. They got to have food and water to hold them there.
Okay, so let's talk about a little bit more advanced tactic here. Let's say that you've scouted out a big buck and you've seen him several times. When you say they're territorial, do you mean from the same glassing knob you're going to see him within, 200 or 300 yards of where you always see him, or are you going to see him within a mile of where you see him?
Sometimes they'll just break out in a trot and they'll run 2 miles, 3 miles, just in a trot, but generally they'll come back. You may not see him for, half a day or a day because he's off rutting other does or he's cutting through the trees. A lot of these antelope, they'll use, if they're not out in the plains and stuff, but even there, they'll disappear in little ravines and whatnot and get away from you.
But I guess my question is, if you've scouted out a big buck and you've seen him 2 or 3 times, are you looking like from this knob I should see him, or is it more from this knob if I look north and if I look in a half mile by half mile square, he will be in there?
I wouldn't say half mile by half mile, but I would say if you're looking from a knob and he's in there and you've seen him several times, he's going to show up. You just got to sit your butt down there and keep glassing and wait for him to pop up. Okay,
so it's highly unlikely that if you're up on a knob and you've got good vantage and you've seen a buck from that knob several times, it's very highly unlikely that he's run 7 miles away and he's completely gone. That would be a rare occasion, you would think.
It is rare, but it happens.
Talk about maybe a couple of bucks. I know you guys like to target specific bucks, and you like to obviously do a lot of scouting. Talk to me a little bit about the grind in targeting specific bucks and maybe some specific instances where, some of the things you had to go through to relocate a buck or to stay on and get your hunter on that specific buck.
Well, I guess scouting antelope, it can seem easy sometimes because they're very visual and they're in country that's open, but sometimes they can just disappear and you don't know where they went. They could lay down in a little draw out of sight or something. So probably the biggest challenge you deal with, unfortunately, is somebody else finding out about your big buck that you found and trying to make a plan on on getting him before somebody else gets him.
Yeah, that's a huge deal with the rifle hunts or muzzleloader hunts, is especially in a unit like Unit 10 or Unit 9, somewhere where you have 40, 50, 60, 70 permits, especially in the areas that the antelope are really highly visible. You're going to have competition if there's a big buck. More than likely, there's going to be another hunter or two or three, and it gets pretty competitive. And sometimes, Lee and I have been in situations where it gets to the point where it's not worth it, because, guys are pushing the envelope both on the guided side as guides and on the side of DIY hunters as well. Unfortunately, when guys wait 20, 30 years, sometimes the ugly side of hunting comes out. So
yeah, I know it, like a lot of different animals, but with antelope where they're pretty visible, I've seen cases where it can get ugly. Speaking about that, in a tactical, strategic standpoint, if you've got a big buck located, and as the season gets closer and closer and closer, do you back off from where you're watching the buck from, or do you try and stay in there tight on your buck and kind of just keep around him at all times? And if you run into people, do you tell people specifically that's the buck that I'm hunting, or do you kind of back off hoping that if you stay away, maybe it won't draw attention to the buck? I kind of want to get a little more advanced methodology that you guys use in trying to.
We can't give away all of our secrets, Jay.
Well, let's hear some of the inside scoop here.
From my perspective, is if I see a lot of guys in the area, then I Lee and I are both kind of non-confrontational people. I will possibly try to hide the truck. And then not make my presence known. I don't want anybody to know that I'm there. Now, if it's somebody that I know, somebody that we have mutual respect for, either as a hunter or as a guide, and they see us or whatnot, then, I'll probably make an effort to say, hey, man, we got a buck right here. We're trying to get him killed, whether it be for a hunter or whether it be for my mom and dad or for my daughter. That would be my mentality. But if there's nobody around, I'm going to try to hide my vehicle. I'm going to try to make my presence not known, because I'll throw my people. There's a lot of people that do know my vehicle in Arizona, especially my little Toyota. So it's one of those things where if people don't know you're in there, the better off you are. And that's just how I am. So I don't know. Lee can throw his 2 cents in on that one.
Yeah, that's basically the same way I feel about it, but we really strive, because we kind of had a bad experience a couple of years ago with that, where we did end up just backing completely out because it was so blown out of proportion. It wasn't funny. So we really strive these days now to look into all the little nooks and crannies and try and find antelope where other people aren't looking. And it's actually proved to be really helpful, because a lot of times you find bucks that people don't know about. And if we know a lot of people are watching a big buck, I usually just back out, because it's not worth the drama that can go on. So I try and find areas to hunt where you don't have the hunt pressure to deal with, just because I don't like when a hunt turns into that. It takes a lot of the hunt away from the experience.
I think, Lee and I are both, of the decision. It's better. There's places you can find bucks and big bucks in areas and little nooks and crannies that, because of their territorial issues and because of, if you find topography and tree coverage and stuff like that don't get seen very often. And those more wide open places, those places that everybody hits, those are going to be the bucks that first fall or get or have the confrontations around. And so we strive to, we like hunting areas where there's nobody around. It's a much better quality experience, especially if you got a buck that's 87 and he's out in the flats and you got 10 guys around him, and you got a buck that's 86 and he's in this little nook and corner and you haven't seen anybody. Your odds of killing that 87 buck anyway are low. And so it's just one of those deals where it's just better off for the client, for us, for our family, whoever we're hunting with, to just not put ourselves in that situation.
So you would rather your hit list before the season on all the inventory and bucks that you've seen, a lot of times bucks that you decide to go after are based upon, maybe it's not the biggest one in the unit, but it's probably the one that we can kill the most efficiently, and that plays a huge role in what buck you guys decide to go after.
Yeah, and you really got to know the client too. And Lee and I talk about if the client's capable and what his, does he have some sort of physical issue? Is he an older guy or gal? Is it a kid? Is it a guy that can really go? Can he flat out shoot? So there's a lot of things that go into that. It's just one of those deals where we just try to avoid it, especially when you're talking, that small of a fraction. And there's a lot, and Lee and I are of the opinion that there's a lot of bucks that don't get seen because they're not in those high priority type areas, and you just got to dig them up.
Absolutely. Guys, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about field judging these antelope. I have very little experience hunting antelope. I just one animal that I really haven't dove into. I haven't gone all in on, and so I'm going to be interested to hear what you guys have to say about field judging. Let's talk about, what makes an 80-inch buck, an 85-inch buck, a 90-inch buck. Give me some references as far as, what the most important aspect of score is, and let's just dive into field judging. I know mass is probably the most important thing on an antelope. Either one of you can start. Talk to me about field judging antelope.
Go ahead, Lee.
Okay, well, there's a lot of different angles and aspects, but to put it simply, to start out with, there's such a small amount of antelope tags that for a guy to get where he feels comfortable judging them, you need to look at a lot of them, and then you need to see a lot of those antelope actually hit the dirt and be able to measure them before you really feel comfortable saying, yeah, I think I was pretty accurate on field judging that antelope. So it takes a lot of time, and they are really challenging because there isn't a lot of inches there you're working with. On an elk, you can, we have elk that score over 400 inches sometimes. That's a lot of inches. There's less margin for error there, or more margin. But on antelope, sure, you have bucks. A buck is 82 inches. So,
1 inch is a big percentage of score. So what you're saying is an 80-inch, 85, 90-inch buck compared to a 400-inch elk, whereas an inch with a 400-inch elk doesn't make that big of a difference, but an inch with an antelope is huge.
Yes, exactly.
And talk to me about air judging versus, taking, each measurement and trying to estimate. Talk to me about how you field judge these things, Lee.
Well, in air judging, it's pretty easy. Most people can say, oh, that's a big antelope, or that's a small antelope, or a medium antelope, and that's a good place to start. But it sounds kind of silly saying that, but it really is. In air judging, it's really hard to judge a buck that's in that middle range, 78 to 83 inches. When you see a really big antelope and you just say, man, that thing is a giant, just air judging, those are very rare, and once in a while we all get to experience seeing something like that. But to get to where you understand antelope, they're real similar. There's not a lot of differences. Most of their horn makeup is real similar, and it's the same. Their horns are dark. The dark color makes it hard to tell measurements and mass. And mass is really important. An antelope basically has to get age class, just like anything else. But age class is very important with antelope. If they don't get old enough, then they can't build the mass up. Because mass is where they start going from just an 80-inch or 82-inch buck to being able to be a high 80s or 90-inch super caliber antelope. They really have to have the mass to be able to do that.
So basically, when you're the scoring of an antelope, you have the length of your horn, and then you have your circumferences, and then you have the measurement of the prong. Am I correct?
Yes.
Yes.
And the mass is the most important because you get 4 measurements of mass. You get the base, the first quarter, the second quarter, and the third quarter. Walk me through scoring an antelope from the lengths to the prongs to the circumference, as far as where you take those measurements, and then maybe some of the things that you're looking for when you're field judging each of those aspects.
Well, a lot of it is it's all cumulative, and there's so many ways that you can miss a little bit here and there. So length of horn is, you can compare from their eye to their nose, the distance there, the length there, the length of their ear. The length of most antelopes' ears in Arizona is 5 3/4, 6 inches long. You can use those for bases on length. The length of prong, is measured from the back of the horn around to the tip of the prong. Some guys don't realize that. It adds a little extra length. It's really hard to judge that length. And then when you're talking about the length of the horn, a lot of antelope have a lot of curl. It's hard to measure that curl, but the more curl they have, they can look short from the side, but if they have a lot of curl, it can really add a lot of length to their horn. In measuring coming up with the mass measurements, there's references you can use referencing their eye. The antelope's eye is about 2.5 inches from tear duct to the back, and you can use that to measure and verify that they have, if they have it looks like their horn's 2 inches wide or 3 inches wide. And you start looking at that, but then when you're really trying to get one really close, you really have to look at them at different times of the day. They can look different in the morning than they do in the evening because of the light. And a lot of times I have to go look somewhere else for a day and then go back and look at a buck if I think he's really big and reanalyze it, because he can look different one day to the next.
How much of field judging, taking photos and video of bucks at different times of the day, different sunlight angles, how often does a buck look totally different, say, in a different light? I mean, is it all the time or half the time?
I think it's a lot of the time, and it really helps, like you said, if you get really good quality photos, where you can really zoom in and see detail. That's huge. I mean, a lot of times you can't do that. You can't get close enough to get that kind of picture quality, especially in the summertime when it's hot because of the heat waves. It's really hard to get good quality photos of them. So you really just have to get as close as you can and look at them multiple times. And you're familiar with that with scoring sheep. Sheep are really tough to field judge also.
I'll tell you from Lee's been doing it longer than I have as far as field judging, and so one of the things you have to look at it, just like he said, you have to look at a ton of antelope. But kind of before that is, if you go in with the mindset in your unit that you're going to kill a 90-inch antelope or you're going to kill a 70-inch antelope, especially if you have a rifle tag, I think that's the wrong mindset to go into it with. I think you need to go in with the mindset of you're going to kill the best available pronghorn antelope, and then, because there's so many different factors that weigh into it depending upon your unit and so on and so forth. But look over as many antelope in that unit as you possibly can, because just like we were talking about genetics, different areas hold different genetics and characteristics, and sometimes their horn configurations aren't that different. But if you don't pick up on the little variances in horn configuration, then like a buck that hooks forward, like the buck we killed last year with Mark, he looked huge at times to the normal person. And there was even times that I would send Lee a photo and be like, man, he looks giant. And you have to really get a barometer, and it's hard to do unless you lay your hands on them. I would carry my horns around that I have from my bucks and have physical measurements. I had 30 or 40 photos in my phone, and then I would take a ton of video and a ton of pictures of bucks, and then I'd come back and I'd be like a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde in my office, or I'd be like Dr. Jekyll, and I'd be freaking out, and I'd be sending pictures to Lee. And I know this sounds crazy coming from a guy, but you really stress you want to do the best possible job you can do with field judging. So, you're sending pictures and video. Video, to me, tells more of a story, but it also depends on if you're filming through a scope, if you're filming without a scope, and time of day, like Lee said. And then if you go look at a buck, we've followed a buck for 3 years, and I had Lee come and look at him, and that buck was killed this last year, and he was 89 6/8. We didn't kill him. A DIY hunter killed him. But I had Lee come out and look at that buck just to verify what I was seeing, because antelope are a lot like sheep, but I'm going to say they're even a little bit trickier, because you have another measurement with the prongs, and you're almost half the inch measurement than a sheep. So and their horns are black. So that black can really kind of deceive you depending upon the shadows and the time of day. And for me personally, again, that distance. If I'm looking at them through my 10 powers at 100 yards, a buck can look really big, but I'm not getting the definition. Versus if I look at them through my 30s at 100 yards, a buck, I can make him look, if you're not used to that kind of crop size, that buck will look a lot smaller. So you have to compare like pictures, like distances, like times, and then you have to have like a gallery to be the most accurate, in my opinion. You have to have a gallery, and then you have to bounce it off people that know what big pronghorn are, and you have to just keep pounding at it. And then unfortunately, because we live in Arizona, if you don't touch a lot of pronghorn, it's really hard to be accurate. I mean, I know there's guys that say they can get them down to within an inch. I'll tell you, I'll give you, like that buck we killed last year, or one of the bucks we killed last year. I mean, it was 85 to 87, 84 to 86, and then you get comfortable and you say, I think he's 85 to 86. But I mean, just a quarter inch off on each of those mass measurements. That's an inch on each side. That's 2 inches. That's just on the mass, just a quarter inch. So. Sure. It's tough.
Every little measurement counts, and as soon as you miss one, and you start moving that down, saying, well, if this is 2.5, or if this is a 6-inch circumference, or what have you, and you start getting off a little bit, it can go into the whole horn. And if you miss it on the low side, it can also grow on you. But more times than not, with most horned animals, people miss a measurement and they start using that throughout their field judging, and they end up always missing on the low side. They end up always, in my mind, over judging stuff. Guys, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about some bucks that you did kill. Craig, you mentioned a buck last year. I think you guys shot a buck on a muzzleloader hunt that went 85 or 80, whatever he went. Can you tell me a little bit about that buck and maybe some of the other big bucks that you guys have been a part of?
Yeah, last year we had a muzzleloader hunter And it was one of those, put a lot of time scouting for that hunt. It was in Unit 18A, and it's pretty close to where I live, and so that's why I took that hunt, and I was the one guiding that hunt. But it was one of those deals, again, you just went out there with the mindset of, of trying to find the biggest available buck to kill, and then, trying to play out any lead that you hear about, and chasing down rumors. And then I found that buck, I think it was, I don't know if it was a week before the season or what, but I'd been in that area 2 or 3 times. But he was in a really tight spot. And he was in a spot that there was quite a few antelope, but I just didn't pick him up. And then one day I just happened to glass him up. I was actually looking for mule deer, and I glassed him up, and then I went back and I found them. I think maybe it was a week before the hunt, because then I found him 3 or 4 days later again, and he was right in the same area, and I seen him from the road, and he was out in this big meadow, and when I seen him, he just looked giant, and I had to calm myself down, because initially, I get excited, and just like anybody else, and he's a giant, biggest buck you've ever seen, and then you have to really back yourself down, reel the line in, and say, wait a minute, what is he? So I went and crept up on him and took video and pictures of him, and then sent him to Lee and looked him over, and I knew he was definitely the biggest buck. That there was one other buck that was kind of in that same range, maybe a little bit smaller. A little bit different horn conformation. Anyway, I knew it was the best buck I'd seen in a lot of days of scouting. And so that was the buck with only less than a week left to hunt that, I talked to the client and said, hey, we can continue looking for a better buck, but, this is the amount of days I put in, and this buck right here is a heck of a buck. And I sent him the pictures, and he's like, let's shoot him. So we went and we found him. I think it took us till about 10 o'clock for him to pop out. We glassing from the same knob, and finally, 4 or 5 hours after glassing, we found him and went over there and got him killed and took him back. And I think he was 85 6/8 SCI official. Is what he went, and then he grossed like 84 or something, Boone and Crockett. That's the one thing that maybe the listener out there doesn't understand about pronghorn is they shrink a lot. Their horns probably.
What do you mean they shrink a lot?
In the drying period, they will shrink a lot. I got bucks at my house here that have now they're 10 years old, but they've shrunk 3 or 4 inches. So that's, where you can't account for that shrinkage and what the hunter or what you do with the animal afterwards, and you have to abide by the Boone and Crockett and Safari Club rules as far as how you store those horns. But there's some animals that will shrink a lot on you, and so it's just hunters don't know that about antelope.
Sure. And that's probably with the water content in the horn, and with most of the score being mass, they're obviously going to shrink up a little bit because they have a hollow core, correct?
Yes.
Lee, why don't you tell me about one of the better bucks you've been involved with lately?
Well, last year I had a guy that had close to 20 bonus points that drew as a non-resident. He drew a Unit 10 rifle antelope tag, and his main concern was not necessarily killing the biggest buck that we could find, but he just wanted to have a really good hunt experience, and he'd heard some stories about how it can be competitive for antelope. So the challenge I had was finding a good buck that we could go and hunt without having a lot of hunt pressure. And I knew of some really good bucks that were out in some open, more your typical antelope country. But I kept looking in some of the areas that we talked about earlier in the conversation where we might be able to find a really good buck that we could kind of have to ourselves. And wasn't really coming up with anything until just a couple days before the season, and just happened to look in the right spot at the right time and found a buck that, made my eyes bug out because he had really, really good mass. That was the first thing that hit me, was his mass. And so I knew that he was definitely something we needed to look at. And so I found him in the evening and got a little bit of video of him. And then I went back the next morning and looked at him again and compared the video and, fought my head over it for the next day. And then we went and hunted him the first morning, and I'd made the decision that, he was a really good buck. We needed to try and hunt him, and he ended up being a buck that was a little bit over 84 inches gross, which was a really good buck last year for Unit 10 because it was a little bit of a rough year horn growth wise. It was a real dry winter, and it really affected the antelope. They didn't finish out real well, so the guy was really happy with his hunt, and it was a real good feeling that we didn't have to go out there and bump elbows with all the other hunters and to find a buck like that on a year like last year.
Sure. Sounds like a great buck. Guys, in closing, give me your 2015 antelope forecast for the units that you like, and not talking specifically, per unit, but how's it looking out there, and do you expect this year to be a good year for good horn growth and good trophy potential?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's going to be better than the past 2 or 3 years, or maybe longer than that, just because of the winter precipitation we've had, and it's been warm, so there's green feed been growing, and there's green feed been on, which is kind of uncharacteristic in this part of the state for there to be green feed early like this. So I think that'll really have a big impact on the antelope's health, and we should see some antelope be able to reach their potential this year horn growth wise.
That's great. And are there some units that you guys are hoping to get some clients in that you know about, some bucks that have made it through, and are you excited about a couple of particular bucks?
Yeah, we are. We're excited. We hopefully we'll get a couple guys in some of our units that we've got experience in units 10 and the 18 units, maybe even a 19B or 19A. I think they're all going to have some really good bucks that we know about available.
Great. I didn't draw an antelope tag this year. You guys personally didn't draw, so I know you're looking forward to getting a few clients. How can you guys be reached? How can people follow you? Give me your breakdown on your websites and Instagrams and all of that, please.
They can go to exclusivepursuits.com, or they can go to our Facebook. Just type in the search bar, Exclusive Pursuit Outfitters. I'm sorry, it was Exclusive Pursuit Outfitters. Did I say Exclusive Pursuits?
So it's exclusivepursuitoutfitters.com.
Yes.
And then Facebook, Exclusive Pursuit Outfitters.
Yep.
And on Instagram?
On Instagram, it's exclusive _ pursuits _ outfitters, or you get hashtag exclusive pursuits and find us the back doorway.
Okay. And then personally, Craig Steele, AZ, I believe. And then Lee, what's your Instagram? Are you on Instagram?
Yeah, it's Lee Murphy, EPO.
Okay, Lee Murphy, EPO. Well, guys, I know we just scratched the surface here talking about antelope. I can tell from talking to both of you and knowing both of you how passionate you are about guiding antelope hunters, and how passionate you are about trying to be credible, and I know from years past, seeing videos and photos that you guys send. I'm fortunate to be on that list of a few guys that you send stuff to, and I know how much detail you guys put into it, and I know how much time and thought you have. So it's nice to talk to you guys about an animal that you really love. I wish you guys the best this season. Look forward to seeing how you do with your clients, and just want to thank you for being on with me today and discussing antelope.
Well,
You're
it
welcome,
sounds
Jay.
good. Man. Thank you.
All right, buddy. You guys both take care, and we'll be chatting at you on a future episode about more things with hunting antelope. Take care, guys.
All right, bye.
Thanks for listening to the J. Scott Outdoors Western Big Game Hunting and Fishing Podcast, brought to you by GoHunt.com Insider. Use the promo code JScott and receive a $50 KUIU gift card when signing up for the GoHunt.com Insider. Research faster, hunt more. Go to GoHunt.com/insider and join today.